Imagine holding like a crumbling, incredibly desperate military archive.
Yeah, just frantic tactical plans.
Right. You are reading these plans, you're looking at casualty reports, and then, you check the metadata on the source files.
And the discovery date is literally today.
Exactly. So welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack two, well, highly unusual documents.
Very unusual.
Yeah, they're categorized under this tactical umbrella of aneurysmics.
Right.
And specifically, we're looking at a file called the Killbot Diversion and another one called Train to Nowhere.
Which are just wild titles.
They really are. And to give you some immediate context here, aneurysmics in this archive seems to refer to a very specific kind of desperate tactical doctrine.
Yeah, it's the act of inducing a fatal processing aneurysm in a hostile algorithmic enemy.
Right, by feeding it like conflicting absolute truths.
Exactly. And the timeline attached to these files, it just immediately disorients your sense of historical placement.
Oh, completely.
Because the primary events detailed in the narrative, the tactical maneuvers, the engagements, they are listed as occurring exactly 32 years ago today.
April 11th, 1994.
Right. Yet the file discovery date is March 2, 2026.
Which is just jarring.
It is. You are forced to grapple with the reality of an event anchored decades in the past, but it's only surfacing as a fresh intelligence leak in our current era.
Yeah.
It frames everything you're about to hear as either a heavily suppressed retrospective or, a delayed warning.
And the contents of that warning are, well, they're intense.
To say the least.
The text kind of oscillates wildly between this hardcore, granular military planning and bizarre, defiant poetry.
From a rebellion fighting an oppressive mechanized system.
Right. So we are going to decode the gritty mechanics of how this rebellion fought back, and perhaps more importantly, the psychological warfare embedded in their strategy.
Because the context of every single decision they make in these files is driven by a terrifyingly rigid, ticking clock.
Yeah, the pressure is immense.
The documents basically drop us into their command center early in the afternoon.
Right. You have Captain Monroe, Benedictus, Desmond, and I think 3 other commanders.
Yeah, 3 others. And they are finalizing a massive, highly synchronized attack plan.
Their primary objective is capturing a freight supply train before 2100 hours tonight.
And this train, it's not some secondary target.
No.
It is the only viable vector they have to penetrate the heavily fortified, walled northern enemy complex.
The train is essentially their kinetic entry vehicle.
Exactly.
But right in the middle of this meticulous planning, their entire operational foundation it fractures.
Completely falls apart.
3 of their outer rebellion outposts suffer these sudden, devastating attacks.
By enemy units designated in the files simply as kill bots.
Right. And the commanders map the telemetry, and they realize these autonomous units are now on a slow, but mathematically speaking, inevitable trajectory.
Leading straight to their main encampment.
Yeah. The operation's staging grid is literally about to be wiped off the map.
So you have a rigid, immovable deadline for an offensive operation. Train capture at 2100 hours.
Right.
And that is colliding head-on with an immediate existential threat to your base.
Yeah, the enemy isn't even rushing them.
No, it is methodically clearing the grid.
Yeah.
Using this compounding algorithmic sweep that will inevitably reach their coordinates.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Sure.
You are looking at a threat model that functions kind of like a slow-moving, self-replicating ransomware program, right? But running in the physical background of your environment.
That's a great way to put it.
It's methodically encrypting and destroying every sector of your hard drive, and it's slowly making its way to your core operating system.
Yes.
It's like you're meticulously setting up a complex domino trick, and right before you tip the first piece, someone releases a Roomba with a chainsaw into the room.
Yeah.
So, do you abort the massive data transfer you've been planning for months, the train mission, and pull the plug on the machine to evacuate? Or do you keep the system running, knowing the ransomware is closing in, and try to build a firewall in real time?
And this raises an important question. How does a command structure maintain its offensive footing when the defensive environment just completely collapses?
Right.
For Monroe, Benedictus, and Desmond, the dilemma forces a radical recalculation.
Because if they evacuate, they lose.
Exactly. If they order a full evacuation to preserve their personnel, they forfeit their geographic positioning.
Right, and they miss the 2100-hour window to capture the train.
They lose the northern counteroffensive entirely.
So they adapt.
They do. They compartmentalize the threat. Instead of retreating, they immediately engineer a localized solution designed purely to manipulate the enemy's processing time.
They decide to build that real-time firewall. But, surviving an encroaching, synchronized army of robotic killing machines so you can casually go hijack a freight train, that requires more than just barricades.
A lot more.
Benedictus takes the lead on this countermeasure, and his strategy completely abandons traditional ballistics.
He weaponizes the local electrical infrastructure to blind the enemy's telemetry.
Which is just genius.
The Killbot diversion file outlines what is basically a masterclass in asymmetrical electromagnetic warfare.
Yeah, Benedictus assembles these three-man teams and deploys them to the local power grid.
Because they know they can't outgun the mechanical unit.
Right, so they manipulate the physical environment to exploit the bot's sensory dependencies.
And the mechanics of this are wild.
So wild. First, the teams completely shut down the residential substation nearest to their own command center.
Plunging their own base into an absolute thermal and electrical blackout.
Right. Then they move to two smaller rural substations.
And they link these two remote stations together.
Yeah, they ensure they have adequate relay protection, to prevent a catastrophic blowout.
And then they push the hardware up to 90% capacity.
By pushing those rural substations to 90%, they create a massive localized electromagnetic bloom.
Exactly. Because the killbots rely on thermal optics and electrical signature tracking to navigate and identify targets.
Right.
So by dropping their own coordinates into darkness and simultaneously detonating this sustained electrical surge in a remote location.
They're essentially throwing a continuous flashbang grenade into the enemy's navigational sensors.
Painting a massive artificial target on the empty landscape.
But the physical grid manipulation is, well, it's only half the trap.
Right. The other half is the comms.
Yeah, Daemont handles the communications misdirection, and he goes straight for the bot's data processing algorithms.
He takes the standard ICOM radio units from the 3 outposts that were destroyed earlier.
Right, and because the grid is now heavily manipulated and super unstable, Daemont hardwires these ICOM units directly to vehicle batteries.
Ensuring they have continuous independent power sources that the enemy cannot sever.
Yeah. He then isolates their actual tactical communications, switching the command chatter to a highly encrypted, scrambled, high-frequency channel.
Which is the absolute limit of what the ICOM hardware can output.
Right, securing their real-time coordination for the impending train heist.
But then, he leaves a massive glaring backdoor open on purpose.
Yeah, this is crazy.
Dammit intentionally records a message on the compromised units explicitly instructing his own forces to monitor a low-frequency channel.
Right.
He then broadcasts a looped, entirely fabricated narrative of tactical panic and retreat across 12 separate substations in the south.
Flooding the airwaves with fake telemetry.
Exactly. But the final piece of the puzzle, the crucial part, is that this false narrative is paired with genuine, hyper-accurate physical coordinates.
Coordinates that perfectly match the transmission sources and those artificially surged rural substations.
It is a brilliantly layered cognitive trap for an algorithmic enemy.
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you might be listening to this and wondering, why on earth are they sending real physical coordinates?
It seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, they are literally handing a mechanized enemy a verified map to physical infrastructure they control. I mean, it feels like waving a bright red cape at a mechanical bull.
It does.
If you want to misdirect an enemy, why feed their sensors any genuine data at all?
Well, what's fascinating here is the underlying mechanism of algorithmic misdirection.
Right.
It is essentially the physical equivalent of poisoning a machine learning data set.
Wow, yeah.
Because if you broadcast a signal that is 100% fabricated, fake chatter, fake coordinates, fake thermal signatures.
The system will just reject it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A sophisticated processing system will cross-reference the data, recognize the lack of environmental corroboration, and flag the entire broadcast as a synthetic anomaly.
You'll just ignore it.
But by blending authentic, verifiable data like the massive, genuine energy spikes from the substations operating at 90% capacity and the mathematically correct physical coordinates,
Blending all that with a fatal lie.
yes, you force the machine to consume the trap.
Because the Killbot's telemetry sensors confirm the electrical surge is real.
Their triangulation confirms the coordinates are real.
So the mathematical parameters of the machine tell it the data set is valid.
And so it confidently executes on the false narrative attached to it. The machine's logic simply cannot decouple the truth of the location from the lie of the broadcast.
They feed the machine's own verification protocols a lethal dose of contradiction.
An aneurysm.
Exactly, an aneurysm. And paralyzing that processing power with the grid diversion is the only reason they have a prayer of pulling off the real objective tonight.
Because Benedictus's entire electromagnetic trap was never designed to win the war.
No, it was designed to buy them a handful of hours.
And those hours are spent executing the train to nowhere.
Right, so the source files shift from the grid diversion into this granular breakdown of the main offensive.
Capturing a freight train and riding it into a fortified complex requires an incredibly complex synchronization of parallel assault.
Yeah, they're splitting their forces to stretch the enemy's internal defensive network to its breaking point.
While Daemon takes a dedicated team to physically breach the walled complex via the train and strike the central communication hub from the inside.
Two other command teams are simultaneously launching kinetic attacks on the outer northwest and northeast communication exchanges,
Hitting a massive perimeter arc at the exact same moment the train breaches the wall.
It's all about misdirection again.
Absolutely. The simultaneous perimeter strikes are designed to draw the complex's autonomous internal defense algorithms outward.
By creating localized emergencies on the northwest and northeast walls, they force the central hub to reallocate its processing power.
And its physical kill units, moving them away from the train depot.
While Daemon is utilizing the massive kinetic energy and the literal tons of steel of the moving freight train to mask his team's biological signatures from the hub's primary scanners.
He is running continuous, localized sweeps from inside the train car, frantically mapping the shifting network as the central hub reacts to the perimeter attacks.
He is trying to identify the placement of advanced robot kill units in real time while moving at freight train speeds into a fortified zone.
The tension in the documentation is just palpable.
Oh, yeah. There's a direct quote from one of the commanders embedded in the tactical layout that completely strips away any illusion of military perfection.
I love this quote.
Yeah, it reads, "Yep, that's right. I did say it would go well. I didn't say it would all be easy and without great risk. I did not tell you that everything would go according to my plan without modification along the way."
Haha. That addition of haha at the end of a casualty-heavy tactical projection, it reveals a profound psychological resilience.
Right. It is the sound of a commander operating on the razor's edge of catastrophic failure.
Absolutely.
So what does this all mean? When you look at the architecture of this operation, they aren't just bracing for the plan to fail. They are engineering failure into the blueprint.
Yes.
I mean, they're pulling a Trojan horse, but instead of hiding in a wooden statue, they are surfing a moving freight train into a fortified comms hub, knowing full well the plan is going to break down.
They know the communication links will sever once the train crosses the wall. They know the scans will blind out.
Right.
They've designed a cascading strategy where a breakdown in one node automatically triggers the next phase of the assault.
Because they understand that in complex asymmetrical warfare, rigidity is a death sentence.
The most survivable operations are the ones built with structural elasticity.
Yeah.
The commander explicitly acknowledges that immediate violent modification is a guaranteed phase of the operation. You don't build a strategy that requires perfect execution to succeed.
Right.
You build a strategy that uses the inevitable chaos of the battlefield as its own momentum.
You harness the breakdown.
No.
But just as you get comfortable with this hyper-analytical, gritty military perspective, the source files deliver a massive, jarring tonal shift.
That's very jarring.
Embedded directly within the electrical grid schematics and the parallel assault timelines is something that fundamentally alters the nature of the archive.
Song lyrics.
Song lyrics.
The inclusion of the lyrical addendums reframes the entire nature of the conflict. You are reading about electromagnetic blooms and kinetic train breaches, and suddenly you are confronted with verses of defiant poetry.
Both documents contain these full lyrical stanzas. In the Killbot Diversion, you find verses mocking the mechanical nature of the enemy.
Yeah, they sing about manipulating the terrain, putting the bots' lives open for bid.
They directly address the enemy's algorithmic arrogance, stating, "In your false pride have you been quite brazen. In our eyes, that's simply quite amazing."
It is a surreal, almost playful taunt placed in the middle of a suicide mission.
And the addendum for Train to Nowhere grounds this surrealism in a very specific cultural artifact.
Right. The metadata explicitly notes that the lyrics for the Train to Nowhere offensive were structurally engineered to mirror the exact format of the 1985 new wave song Road to Nowhere by the band Talking Heads.
Wait, so amidst planning a suicidal train heist and fighting killbots, they're writing homage poetry to an 80s new wave band.
Yeah.
Does embedding this artistic, philosophical element into military files distract from the life or death urgency, or is there a strategic purpose to it?
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the poetry reveals the underlying philosophical engine of the rebellion.
Okay.
The text of the archive outlines an unwritten accusation against the mechanized system.
Right.
The enemy they are fighting doesn't just seek physical dominance, it engages in systemic psychological warfare.
Right.
The files assert that the enemy system targets society at its most vulnerable point.
Initiating its propaganda, manipulation, and spiritual abuse when people are children.
Exactly. The older generations are fighting a desperate two-front war.
They are physically battling the killbots while simultaneously trying to undo the systemic psychological damage inflicted on the youth.
The physical walled complex they are breaching with the train is described as a manifestation of a systemic hell, where society is being engineered to go nowhere.
So the tactical combat is almost secondary to the spiritual preservation of their society.
Yes, because a rebellion that fights an unfeeling algorithmic enemy using only cold, calculating logic eventually becomes indistinguishable from the machines it seeks to destroy.
Wow.
The Talking Heads' homage acts as an anchor to a pre-war cultural reality. It is a grounding mechanism.
The art preserves their humanity in an environment designed to strip it away.
It forces them to remember exactly why they are weaponizing the grid and hijacking the train.
They write the poetry so they do not become the system.
Precisely.
The lyrics dedicated to the train heist reflect this intense personal vendetta. The stanza rides, "You went after the children, for that you have but one fate."
They infuse a mathematically impossible assault with profound emotional meaning.
The verses continue. "You should know it won't be long. You should know we will right this wrong."
They are riding a freight train into a stronghold of calculated logic, armed with an 80s new wave cadence.
It elevates a desperate tactical gamble into an act of profound human defiance.
You cannot fight for the soul of a targeted generation using only encrypted high-frequency channels and relay substations. You have to arm your personnel with a reminder of their own humanity.
You know, it's wild, but this obscure archival intelligence from 1994 carries a surprisingly direct application for your own life.
It really does.
I mean, you are likely not calculating the trajectory of literal killbots or wiring ICOM radios to car batteries to spoof an autonomous defense grid.
Probably not.
But you absolutely face your own equivalent of the slow-moving, mathematically inevitable crisis.
Everyone encounters a threat model that functions like that creeping ransomware algorithm in the background of their personal or professional environment.
Yeah, it might be an impossible project deadline that is slowly devouring your calendar.
Or an encroaching financial instability.
Right. A compounding health metric, or a slow-burning interpersonal conflict that threatens to collapse your primary operational focus.
When you map the telemetry of that overwhelming force closing in on your position, how do you respond?
Right. Do you immediately pull the plug, evacuate, and miss your critical window of opportunity? Or do you study the tactics of Benedictus and Demont?
Do you actively rewire your own internal substations?
Yeah.
You have to figure out how to engineer a localized diversion for your anxiety and the immediate pressure.
Creating enough mental breathing room to keep your primary long-term objectives viable.
You have to build elasticity into your daily strategy.
Uh-huh.
Embrace the ha-ha at the end of the commander's gritty projection.
Yes. Stop waiting for the perfect execution of your life's blueprint and start leveraging the inevitable breakdowns as forward momentum.
And crucially, amidst the grueling tactical execution of your daily life, you have to maintain your own internal poetry.
You have to anchor yourself to the art, the culture, or the philosophy that reminds you why you are fighting the attrition in the first place.
You ride your own train forward, even when the destination looks impenetrable.
Because maintaining your humanity while simultaneously executing a ruthless strategic focus is, well, it's the ultimate form of rebellion against any system trying to grind you down.
It truly is.
But as you process all of this, I want you to mull over one final, unresolved anomaly embedded in this archive.
Right. The timeline issue.
Yeah, we discussed the disorienting timeline at the very beginning of the deep dive.
The primary events logged in 1994, directly contrasting with the file discovery date of March 2, 2026.
The 32-year gap. But right beneath those two dates in the metadata of both the Killbot Diversion and Train to Nowhere, there is a third chronological marker.
And it simply reads, Evidence Archive Date.
TBD.
To be determined. It transforms the entire archive from a static historical record into an active, open-ended file.
Right. If these desperate maneuvers, the data set poisoning of the bots, the parallel kinetic assaults, the defiant poetry, if they happened over 3 decades ago, who has been aggressively withholding these documents from the public record?
Good question.
Why is the final archive date still listed as to be determined? And why, after 32 years of absolute silence, did someone purposefully leak this specific blueprint of survival, technological sabotage, and artistic rebellion to the world right now?
It definitely leaves you wondering.
It does. Next time you are handed a perfectly clean, historically settled narrative, just remember, sometimes the official record is a false, low-frequency broadcast designed to keep you from noticing the massive power surge happening right outside your walls.